The disappearing Louisiana coast is a multi-pronged threat that the people of Louisiana are fighting. This WYES podcast looks into how the scope of coastal loss was recognized, who began sounding alarms, and then started developing a strategy to save the coast and a way of life. The Louisiana coast is changing, slipping away to erosion, subsidence, sea level rise. Decades ago, the threat was recognized and a focus on saving the coast evolved. In this podcast, we'll remember those who sounded the early warnings and began the battle to save our coast. Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh, WYES Community Projects producer. Thanks so much for joining us as we continue our podcast, Early Warnings, about the beginnings of the fight to save the disappearing Louisiana coast. In this episode, we will talk about finding the funds needed to restore the coast, a price tag that only increases as coastal loss persists. Joining me are folks who have been on the front line of fighting for coastal restoration funds over the decades. Steve Mathies, a coastal consultant with STANTEC, who also is our co-producer and host of our podcast, and who in his leadership roles with coastal agencies helped seek out funding for coastal restoration costs. Garret Graves, former U.S. Congressman for the Louisiana's 6th Congressional District and former chair of the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, who for years has been directly involved in securing funding for coastal projects, including negotiating for the state for damages following the BP oil spill. Steve Cochran, who as a coastal advocate has worked at the international, federal, and state level, as well as with the Environmental Defense Fund to improve environmental policy, especially as it applies to coastal loss. And Louisiana Representative Ziza Rang, former executive director of the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, who has overseen budgeting and funding of the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here. I know we're going to have a good discussion about what it takes to try to save our coast in terms of getting the money, because a lot is certainly needed. Steve, let me ask you first. I mean, you have been involved with this from the early days with a state agency, then also with BTNEP. When you all first started realizing we had a problem, what did you think it would cost to fix this problem of coastal loss?
Well, and let me say that we're talking 30 years ago, when we first started, you guys were all around when this happened. If you talked about restoring the coast and you started talking about 20 million or 50 million or, Lord, $100 million, that was beyond what we thought was even possible. And back then we also thought that we could actually restore the whole coast. We could put it back to the way it was, okay? And I think over time that whole realization of the enormity of the problem and the cost of that is what's really changed in that 30 years. Our problem, understanding what that is. And let me say right off the bat that these two guys had a lot more to do with finding funding for how we address this problem, as did, the mere fact that we had Hurricane Katrina and we had the BP oil spill. So it's a huge problem, but it's something that, again, in Louisiana, we got to figure out how to fix, or we lose our state.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's a very, very big problem. In order to preserve our communities and our way of life, we're trying to fix this problem, and money has been put into with various projects now for several years. And so, Stephen, let me start with you. When did we begin to fund coastal restoration efforts? I know you worked in the Romer administration, then also you've been, involved at the federal level as well. When did we realize, we need to start paying for this?
So there was an effort, if you remember, back in Dave Train's administration called a Coastal Wetlands Environmental Levy. They were going to put a price per, cubic foot of natural gas as it flowed through, and ultimately it was shown to be unconstitutional. But there was a beginning effort back then, even before. So that was in in the 80s, I guess, in Romer's administration, the legislature for the first time dedicated revenue from oil and gas to coastal after it exceeded a certain amount. I don't remember exactly what that, but we thought it might produce 6, 8, maybe $10 million a year at that stage. But that's also when, in that same time period, so that was 1989, I think 89 or 90 is probably when CPRA was established, when the BRO Act, when did that pass? Somewhere right about that same time, I think, same time. So that was also recognizing that there was a significant need that was just simply going unmet and how to do that. But that's, I think, when the real push for money began, and then trying to figure out how to do that in a poor state, and what Senator Breaux was great at was finding sources that could help supplement what we would be able to do on our own. So that's really the beginning of it right in there.
And so CPRA, which is Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act. And
Good job.
I know, I remember that. And it's a bunch of agencies, right, working together, federal and state, working together on this coastal restoration problem with some dedicated funds each year that comes to Louisiana. Garret, let's talk about now in your federal experience. You were Billy Tozan's staffer, right? And when was that?
Started in the mid-90s and staffed for him for about 10 years, and then actually started with John Breaux doing an internship, worked for Tozan for about 10 years, and then went back over to the U.S. Senate and worked over there on coastal issues and a number of others for several years before I came back home and started working on the coastal program here.
So let's stay in the federal realm for a second here. In terms of understanding of what Louisiana was going through, and did they believe us? And did they see that we really did need funding to take care of this problem?
You know, it's been quite the evolution. You just heard Steve talking about efforts to try and pull together single-digit millions, and I think probably by the mid-90s we were consistently pulling in through various sources tens of millions. And I think at that time, most folks looked at it like a parochial problem. It was something that Louisiana, and this was the belief, something Louisiana caused, something Louisiana was going to be responsible for fixing. And there were some efforts, and of course the CPRA, or the BRO Act, was the first real effort to get the federal government involved. And as you noted, it wasn't just the federal government, it was the entire sort of natural resource capacity of the federal government working together with the state. And that was fantastic, but I think that Hurricane Katrina was the real wake-up call. That's when folks realized, one, this wasn't just a habitat of birds and fish problem. There were real consequences to humanity. There were real consequences to the livelihood of the state. And I think that that connection between that coastal buffer and our communities really got a major spotlight on it, and folks understood. So we went from tens of millions in the early to mid-90s, and fast forward 10 years to Hurricane Katrina, we probably bounced up to a little over 100 million. And when Katrina hit, we were suddenly talking about billions and billions.
When Katrina hit, if memory serves, that's as we are recording this podcast, we're approaching the 20th anniversary of Katrina. Hard to believe, and it's not a good memory, that's for sure. But the country, of course, was horrified at seeing what was going on in our community. But also they were impacted because wasn't shipping impacted too along the Mississippi River? It sort of gave them an idea that, hey, Louisiana matters. What do you think, Zee?
Well, that's right. I think after Katrina, the impacts associated with Fuchsia and closing Highway 1 and how that completely changed or got the nation's attention, and how critical this area is to not only national security but the economy as well. And going back to when I first started as a fisheries biologist at LSU, and how far we've come, that was at a time when the critical issue on the coast was that's when they had TEDs, and they were burning TEDs and burning NOAA folks in effigy, kind of just, that was the critical issue. But you'd see even the fishermen would recognize that, anecdotally telling stories, well, this is not the same marsh. This marsh is gone. Or we used to, orient how we go out certain areas, and they obviously were seeing it a lot more than everyone else, or quicker than everyone else. But it wasn't until, I think, as you indicated, and as Garret indicated, after Katrina is when it really got a national conscience to really recognize how important this area is, and we need to do something about it.
But see, it was more than just the national audience. I mean, I think back to that time, and if I remember correctly, I mean, I think most of us sort of felt like that big hurricane was going to happen sometime in the future. That if you were an old guy, you lived here and you lived through Hurricane Betsy, maybe you had lived through that storm of a lifetime. So we viewed it as an issue that was going to happen, you know, in the future, not like tomorrow. And then when this whole thing, and we were trying to convince the nation about how important Louisiana was from an oil and gas perspective and navigation and everything else. And it was really hard to do because we could come up with numbers, but they said, well, but I don't really see it. But with Katrina, when you shut down the river and you shut down oil and gas production in the Gulf, and the whole world did watch New Orleans fill with water. That was something that had never happened before. And so we really had the attention of the world. And Garret, I'm sure you'll agree with this, whenever you go to talk to other people, even from around the world, even today, 20 years later, they want to know about Katrina. They want to know about how did New Orleans recover? What's it like now? What have you done different? So I think that was, I mean, we never thought that would happen in our lifetimes because we kind of talked about the disaster. But when the disaster happened, that changed the dynamics for everything.
I think you nailed it. Three major things with Katrina. So we had been out there trying to get people's attention, saying, hey, this really is a national crisis, even before Katrina. Couldn't get traction. Katrina, it did three things. One, as he mentioned, it shut down Port Fourchon and the energy activities in the Gulf of Mexico that caused profound consequences on energy prices to where we immediately saw consumers at the gas pump and even their utility bills paying hundreds of millions of dollars more just within days, hundreds of millions of dollars more in gasoline prices and later in utility prices. Number two, the Mississippi River was shut down. That's America's commerce superhighway, affiliated at the time with 5 of the top 15 ports in the United States. You simply do not have the capacity to put that cargo anywhere else. You don't have enough roads, you don't have enough trains, you don't have enough other waterways, you can't do it. The farmers had crops in the Midwest that were stranded, no way of getting them to market. Goods and services couldn't get in and out. Once again, national consequences. The third one that I think really was profound was actually sort of this humanity thing. I mean, look, this was all over TV, newspaper, all over the world. And I think a lot of people began looking at it and saying, you know what, that's them right now, but at some point that could be me. And so how America responded, I think really resonated with some people, because whether it's a fire, it's a tsunami, it's an earthquake, or it's a hurricane, forest fire, whatever it is, I think folks realize that, you know what, I'm gonna have my disaster at some point, and I don't wanna be treated poorly.
You know, I think also, hopefully the country realized that with the importance of the shipping, you know, the Mississippi River, Port Fourchon, this kept them going across the rest of the country. Louisiana was helping them keep food on their table, gas in their car. So that meant we needed to have a place to conduct our business down here so that we could help them up there. And if the coast of Louisiana didn't exist, it would definitely have a big impact on them. So what we did after Katrina was try to get a little bit more organized, it seemed, in restoring the coast. And of course, I'm heading toward the master plan. So what are your thoughts about developing that master plan?
Well, let me do two things. One, let me ask a question, which was follows from the broader, about the broader understanding that developed across the world even. I actually think it was my impression, because I lived in DC during that period of time, that also helped Louisiana focus in a way that they hadn't either. You know, I mean, we had organizations, we had people pushing for, but we were still nickel and diming because that's the best that we could do. And it wasn't the case that people actually understood how important the wetlands were in Louisiana, to Louisiana,
Right.
period. And I was, and when I know when I came back, so I left, I went to Washington in '92 and didn't come back until 2014. And what I was amazed by was the degree to which people were working together It literally wasn't Republicans or Democrats. Every other environmental issue that I had ever worked on down here was completely segregated is really the best word. I mean, it was just, when you draw a line, you're either for the economy or for the environment, and you can't really be for both. And that really just held up. The arguments were arguments. We didn't really make progress on lots of things because of that. The coast did not ever fall into that trap because it was so important and because people here believed it to be that important. And industry needed that protection as much as anybody else did. And so it really provided, I think, the support in Louisiana to be able to navigate our way through all of the work that you guys did to get the master plan together, to get that stuff like that. I saw that from a distance. So these are the right guys to talk about the master plan and how that came together. But I don't think it could have had Louisiana not understood, oh, this really does matter more even than we might have thought it did.
Okay, so we come to the point now where we understand enough that we really need to get organized about this with a plan and with the funding. How did that all develop? Like Steve said, you guys were right there in the midst of it. Why don't you tell us stories about that? Who wants to start with that one?
Well, when I started, Garret was hired by Governor Jindal to take what had previously been started under the Blanco administration, where they kind of put the framework together. But it was actually putting the bones or actually making the plan to where it can be executed. I think the structure in the federal government, and as Garret indicated, everybody recognized how important Louisiana is to the nation and wanted to do something, but they said, listen, if we're going to do something, y'all need to get better organized, and that's what they said, you needed to develop one entity. And prior to it, the Department of Natural Resources handled coastal restoration, and the Department of Transportation did levees. And a lot of times you would impact another without even knowing it, or you would plan projects without thinking about how it affects other areas. And that was one of the critical aspects about this, is the federal government said, listen, we're going to help you, but y'all need to come together and develop one plan or one process. And that's where, fortunately, Governor Jindal hired Garret. Garret came in, and we started, as we often say, build a plane while we're flying it. So we had the idea of what wanted to be done, but now put it in a process to where it could be executed, and cobbling together aspects of the Department of Transportation Development and DNR, and utilizing that to build out and develop a process, which it's amazing how far it's come, and from seeing it from its inception after the first master plan was more of a framework, but developing both the legal and statutory requirements to set up the agency, to allow it to have the teeth that it needed to make sure we could carry this out. Develop that, implement it, and start implementing projects. And I think it's amazing, and a tribute to Garret and the people who were there who really put it together.
Yeah, and see, it's kind of one of these things, and you guys were obviously there. The idea that you could develop this master plan and would go back before the state legislature and you receive unanimous approval year after year after year. And you got to, before Hurricane Katrina, we were struggling in this state to have representatives that were not from the coast to even recognize how important the coast was to the economy of Louisiana. So a lot of these things all sort of came together at the same time in building that master plan based on science, with everybody having an input, and it wasn't perfect, but it was the first time that you kind of laid out that all the projects that could be executed within prioritizing which ones do we do first. And so I would say that what was done then, the whole world today, when they look at what do we do for coastal restoration or coastal resiliency, I think it's really known globally that Louisiana kind of leads to the whole world. It's something we do better than anyone else. And if you want to work on a coastal restoration or resiliency project anywhere in the world, you have to have done your time and worked on a project in Louisiana. And that, I think, that comes from that master plan and all those efforts that went in to make that happen. And you were in the middle of all that, how you kind of built that. So,
Steve, you're right. It was a fascinating experience. But look, let's go back and be really candid here and somewhat crude. Look, it took Hurricane Katrina, that caused easily tens of billions of dollars in damages. It took Hurricane Katrina, that caused 1,500 plus deaths. in order for folks to wake up and say, hey, we have to take this seriously, both in the state of Louisiana and nationally. And that shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. As you well know, there were ongoing studies looking at bolstering our levee system down here that were being slow walked and not prioritized. But a few things. You mentioned earlier that, sort of early on in the coastal program, you do a $5 million project here or whatever else. Our entire program was compartmentalized. We had dozens of levee districts. We had great projects, but it was these little, flybys. All right, I've got a great $1 million project here. Here's a good $500,000 project there. We need to build a $2 million levee here. No one was looking at it comprehensively. And as Steve and Z both mentioned, we had restoration program over here within Department of Natural Resources. We had hurricane protection levees within Department of Transportation and Development and in the levee districts. But I'll add more. You have things like oyster reefs, which provide a critical role in helping to protect our coast and water quality. That was Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. You have water quality, Department of Environmental Quality. You have your the Louisiana Recovery Authority at the time that was responsible for our recovery operations. I mean, I could go on and on. We had components of the program that were all over the place. There was not anyone who was looking at it comprehensively. There was a master plan that was put together before Z and I came in. Steve and I came in as well. And that master plan was very good in that, as Z said, it began the bones, it began the framework, but all it was taking everyone's ideas and putting them on paper. It wasn't designed to work in a comprehensive manner or in a complementary manner. And in fact, we took one of the earlier versions of the master plan and started trying to put projects associated with what they envisioned. And I think we got into like over $100, in fact, over $200 billion. We're like, okay, this is a pipe dream. And so last thing, I remember when I first got into the state, and I'd come from the federal government where we had written all of these federal laws on Katrina recovery, to coming to the state where I was now responsible for implementing a lot of them. And when I first got there, the state had given us, I think, $200 million. Of course, $200 million, you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. But then we start looking at it and we realize we have billions of dollars in problems. And so I said, hey, tell me, to our team, tell me where you recommend we allocate the money. And they gave me this list and it was great. It was geographically diverse. It was about half restoration, half protection. I'm like, oh, this is great. Tell me how you built it. Well, Representative so-and-so wanted this one, Senator whoever wanted that one, Mayor wanted this one, Parish President wanted, like, oh my goodness. Because all I'm thinking about is $200 million's a lot, but not when you have $10 billion worth of projects, because those are all gonna have senators and representatives as well. So what we did very quickly is we began developing this tool to help inform the decisions. What's the best return on investment? How do you get projects that work in a complementary nature, both restoration, protection, using as folks have developed this multiple lines of defense strategy, barrier islands and levees and coastal wetlands and forests and all these different tools. And under Z's leadership, when we were working together, first time in the world, took 7 different modeling systems, integrated them together, most advanced information tool on coastal resilience, community resilience in the world, and that was the real foundation for what you see today in the master plan. And as Z have said, they are standing on our shoulders and doing, taking it next level, with a few exceptions.
And so was that around 2007? Was that the first master plan? Would you say?
The first one was 2007, and then what I would say the one that was really scientifically based was 2012.
Okay. So we needed money to fund those. And we talked about CPRA, which gives us money each year, right? The federal money. How much comes in?
100 million or so annually.
So
more like 40 or something.
No.
Well,
It is.
Well, it was, but
it's been. Yeah.
But initially, I think when you started, now it is, but I think originally that's what we're looking at, maybe 30, 40 million at the most. Yeah.
Initially, but no,
Yeah.
it's now 80 million plus, and of course that's 85% federal with a 15% non-federal match.
So there's the first master plan. And then as we move along to, you say, 2012, now we're saying in the most recent master plan, what, $50 billion for 50 years? How are we going to get that money?
Look, it's daunting. We're talking 5 million, 30 million, 40 million, whatever. But one thing I want to give you a little bit of confidence here. We sat down, and I mean, we are pulling together funding sources from everything we can find. I mentioned different agencies, managing different pots in disparate manner. We started pulling things together, and I think by the time we left, we had something like 42 funding sources that we had. I mean, it was donations, it was nonprofits, it was obviously federal funds through different agencies, it was state funds. I mean,
Local funds.
Yeah, local funds, levy districts, millage, property tax, sales tax, I mean, you name it. And we cobbled all those together. And when you add the Katrina, all these different funding sources, and the oil spill, we are probably somewhere around 34, 35, 36 billion dollars. 50 billion is daunting. I actually think it's going to be higher. But I want to be clear. We've got 35 plus billion under our belt already.
You mentioned oil spill, so let's talk about that right now. You did the negotiating for the state with the BP after that oil spill, which was 2010, 15 years ago now. What was that like, number one? Sort of, you know, tell us your experiences there and what has it gained us?
Yeah, you know, I really haven't ever talked about a lot of the behind the scenes things, but I will just say it was surreal. I was threatened. I had private investigators all over me.
Wow.
We rejected the offers 2 or 3 times. And the way this ultimately culminated was, I mean, it was just something out of a movie, parts of it. But at the end of the day, largest settlement in U.S. history from a single company, largest settlement in U.S. history from a single company. And we weren't holding out or rejecting offers because we were greedy. We were holding out and rejecting offers because Louisiana was the sole state that had actually gone out there and done our own science to quantify the impacts, the only state out of the 5 that did it. We knew exactly, or had a pretty good idea of what our damages were, and we knew what it was going to take to actually do restoration work, which is why Louisiana got more than half the money of the entire settlement. And it's why, even though every single other entity had agreed to some of the previous offers and Louisiana was the only holdout, it's why the settlement didn't happen, is because they knew without Louisiana at the table, they couldn't close it.
Very important, and that money is really crucial to us now.
It is absolutely crucial because, you know, I know a lot of folks look at that and say, my gosh, you know, up to $10 billion, that's a ton of money, and it is. But you got to remember, the money's it's not just in a bank account. It actually has to achieve a goal or serve a purpose. It has certain objectives it has to hit. And I think that some of that has been confused in recent months.
Okay, now let's touch on the elephant in the room right now, because a really important part of that master plan, with a lot of the money dedicated to it, was the mid-Barataria sediment diversion, very important to create land. But now that has been taken off the table by our present governor. Now, I know everybody here has some strong opinions about that, particularly at least 2 of us. So, you know, just a bunch of questions about that. Now, the money that has been spent on that project, as you said, you just described that, you know, it was pretty specific about how things are supposed to be spent in terms of that BP settlement. The money that was going to go into that project was how much?
It was about, when you add it all up, about 2.8 billion.
Yeah.
2.8 billion. So where is that going to go now? Are we going to have to pay back what already went into that? Where does this all leave us in terms of this important funding to restore the coast? You did a op-ed piece for the local paper not too terribly long ago about that, stating your opinion about it. So what do we do now? What's our next step?
So I think it's not 100% clear what's going to happen with the money that's already been spent. Do they have to pay it back? I think there's a pretty strong argument that they do have to pay it back, but I don't know if the federal players are going to require that. Just don't know yet. They've said they said that's how it should work. That's actually in writing, and so they have said that so far. At a minimum, that money's now disappeared, right? It's gone for nothing, literally nothing. So Garrett's point I've heard him make in other settings is that that money has to be spent I mean, the legal word's nexus to the problem. The money has to be spent to solve the problem that was created by the oil spill. If the money's not being spent for that, then what do you spend it on? You have to give it back. I mean, that's how that would work. But we'll see how that plays out. If the state has to pay it back, let me check my math on this, but that makes the cost of what they've done, what they're doing right now, double. Because one, we've wasted that money, and two, then you actually have to come up with the other money to give it back. So now we're looking at $1.5 billion at a minimum, probably, that's been just disappeared. Now, the people who've worked hard to get money for the state have done an amazing job. But we're still, Garret quietly said it's going to be more than $50 billion. It's I think, always going to be more than $50 billion. One, because inflation on its own takes its toll. Number two, this is an ongoing process. There's never going to be a day that we're done in helping protect coastal Louisiana. So we're always going to need the resources necessary to do that. And so where I think we are now, because of the actions that the state has taken recently, we are losing the most important element of funding, which is credibility. The ability to actually demonstrate that you will do what you say you're going to do. The reason that it's fuzzy about what's going to happen with the money is nobody has actually not done what they said they were going to do with this money yet. They haven't run into the problem. They haven't had to figure out, all right, what do we do now that somebody told us they were going to do something and then they didn't do it? And so we get to be the poster child for that. That's not the game that we need to be playing. Remember when the criminal settlement money was directed to Louisiana, now there's civil penalties in the criminal settlement, the judge wrote in black and white how that money could be spent, because he wasn't yet clear whether he could trust that it would be spent in the right way. And so he said it could only be spent for two things, for Barrier Island reconstruction and for sediment diversions, because he had been briefed on the science. He had been briefed on what would work the best. But he said, I'm not just going to send the money down there. I'm going to send it to NIFWF, which is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation that managed the money, and they will give it to Louisiana, but only for these things. Because we hadn't really proved yet that we could actually handle the money that was going to come our way if we did it. We have been in the process of proving every single day since that money arrived that we can do that, and we can do it right. And now we've broken that trust with this last action.
See, what's the mood in the legislature about this? What Steve is talking about too, is there concern that now this might interrupt the flow of money?
Well, obviously there was concern in regard to the whole issue as to whether or not we have to pay it back, or where is the project or the funding going to go now that we are not, or the state has chosen not to pursue that project anymore. And I think, as Steve said, it's still uncertain. We've been given in the legislature, because obviously we vote on the master plan, which is another key component. I don't think there's any other plan that has to go through the scrutiny that it does, both from the scientific perspective, but through the legislative, 4 committees, it also has the board and everything else. And we were given assurances that the state would not be responsible to pay it back, and that the money would then go to projects within the master plan. We're still waiting to see if, in fact, that's going to happen. Another obvious concern is where one of the things that we did after the New Orleans and vicinity facility, HISDRS, which Garrett's favorite acronym, was
the New Orleans Area Hurricane Protection
System, was concluded, or it still needs to have some improvements, but the whole point is the payback, and one of the things to ensure that we had the money to pay it back. And at the time I was on appropriations, and we had to ensure that we were able and capable to do that. We, as a state, haven't, well, again, from the agency's perspective, they've given us assurances that the state is not responsible, but if in fact they are, how we're going to pay for it is going to be obviously a challenge. And then not to mention the liability associated with not completing the project and where we are right now, because there's still an area that has been impacted. There is the footprint of what we thought was going to be a project that has been impacted, and how that's going to be addressed, and also some other things in terms of buyouts and all that were initially pursued. And so it's a complicated issue. It's not going to be settled, I think, anytime soon. I think it depends on how if in fact challenges are raised and how it's going to be raised, and then the state is going to have to address it. But we've looked at it in committees, both natural resources. We've had special hearings on how to do this, and we've been given assurances that obviously it's not the contractors were taken care of, that were part of this, and that the state would not be on the hook to pay this back. And the money could be used for other projects, which I think that's still in question.
You know, when you say that it's going to take some time to try to figure this one out, I've been involved just, you know, on my media level, doing special projects about our coast now for about the past 15 years or so. And when I started, at that time, I was told, we don't have time.
Right.
You know, we really have to get everything done by 10 years. Well, that's long gone past now. We don't have time to take care of our coast. I guess my question to you guys is, okay, you know, there are those that agree with this decision about the mid-Barataria sediment diversion. There are those who really have absolutely no agreement with it and think it's just a terrible mistake. Are we going to be able to do this? Are we going to be able to save our coast, to save our lifestyle, to save our communities? I mean, we already see some coastal communities moving up, moving north, as the folks down there have told me. I mean, you mentioned, okay, it's doable earlier on in this discussion, but if we run into these kind of problems of where we're not agreeing, are we undoing it? Can we do it, though? What do you all feel about that? I mean, what do you feel? You've been in it so much at so many different levels and dealing directly with the funding. What are your feelings now?
Look, the progress that we've made, especially since Katrina, has been extraordinary. I mean, it really, the money we've pulled together, the scientific community that we've pulled together, the capacity or expertise that we now have in Louisiana, as mentioned earlier, the envy of the world. Those things have been incredible. But Steve had a really good point in that our integrity is now being questioned, I think, and that the decision is still science-based. It's unfortunately political science rather than coastal science or focusing on the ecological productivity and the protection of communities. So look, I think how this decision plays out is going to be impactful. And you know, this discussion has been amazing. I mean, it's hitting the nail on the head in that one, I truly believe there are two sides to this story on mid-Barataria. On the one hand, when we left, this project was $1 billion, which is a lot of money, but it was $1 billion. It has grown to $3 billion. So look, let me take the perspective of the state for just a minute. The current administration, they are correct in that they need to take a fresh look at this project and figure out if there's a way to bring the cost back down. It shouldn't have tripled in cost. I agree with that. It should not have tripled in cost. But fundamentally, anybody, and everyone here, you know, Z's a marine biologist, Dr. Mathies over here is over-credentialed. Steve has been doing this work on the ground and in D.C. for decades and decades. Fundamentally, it is critical, and this is a black and white thing. The river literally created where we are today. It created the state. It was mentioned a little while ago that you're going to have to continue to invest in Louisiana to develop a sustainable footprint. But I want to be clear. The only way we have a prayer of developing a sustainable footprint in Louisiana is by reconnecting the river with the adjacent areas. That sediment in that river is gold. We need to treat it like a very valuable resource. We've got to get it back out in these areas. And so taking a good look at this project, reassessing mid-Barataria sediment diversion, figuring out if you can bring costs back down, I'm on board with. I totally endorse that. Abandoning the project, abandoning river reconnection or diversion projects is a fundamental mistake that undermines our credibility and will prevent us from ever being able to develop a sustainable footprint and protect our communities in South Louisiana.
And the important point to that is, again, it's not like this was developed, or this concept was within the master plan. You look like Coast 2050 and all the other previous investigative approaches from both scientific or even when Congress, we often refer to the National Geographic when Congress decided they were going to utilize levees to protect not only Louisiana, but the significance they provide to the nation. They knew, they didn't know so much about sea level rise, but they recognized subsidence and that when you channel the river and you affect how the hydrology that created this system, it's going to have impacts, and ultimately we're going to have to address it. So they knew way back when that the key to this deltaic process, to sustain it, to keep it, and to preserve it, is utilizing the river. We will not be successful unless we continue to take what Mother Nature intended and tap into the river. You look at Wax Lake Outlet, Neptune Pass, other things that have been created. We have to utilize that, and unfortunately, it's not a new concept, but we still seem to fail to try to embrace it and utilize what the only way we'll be able to save the coast.
Is there any dispute about that among any? I mean, there may be a dispute about how we go about doing it, what kind of projects, what they look like. But is there any dispute about the fact that we need to connect the river?
There was a
Reconnect
palm
to the
reader on
river?
the French in Jackson Square that said it was a
That's
problem.
about it?
No. Anyone with any credibility, no.
So there's, go ahead.
No, I would say I agree with that the sediment in the river is the key to saving the coast, okay? And the more that we put off these decisions and put off action, again, this is, every day we know what happens to our coast, okay? We need to think about, again, we need to operate with urgency. If there are other techniques, if there's other things we need to change, let's look at all of that. But we can't, what we're in now, this us versus them mindset, so we're going to do nothing, that is going to kill Louisiana. And you mentioned the Coast 2050. Gosh, I remember when we were young men and we said Coast 2050. That was so far in the future, it was like unimaginable, okay? And the report you mentioned at National Geographic, that was over 100 years ago.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've known this is an issue that was going to fall upon someone's shoulders, and it's just fallen upon our shoulders, or the people here that are now part of this. And we got to figure our way out of this and not just sit back and do nothing. We have these issues, the financial issues. I think those are severe. We need to resolve that as quickly as possible because it puts a whole different complexion on this if all of a sudden Louisiana's got to pay that money back.
Yep.
And now I got to come up with, $1 billion cash to give back? I mean, you got to pay the contract. I mean, we got to figure that out quickly, okay? So,
One of the things that gives me hope, look for hope, right? One of the things I think that you guys did when you put together the plan is you built in the process for fixing mistakes because it gets reviewed. Seriously, completely turn everything upside down and look at it. It gets reviewed every 6 years now. Every 6 years it gets reviewed. And there's an annual plan that gets produced every year. And so you literally can go, you know what, we've learned more now. We made a mistake there in what maybe that project didn't work the way that we thought it was going to do, so we have to adjust for that. The process is in place to be able to do that. We just have to have the courage to do it. I mean, we really do. We just have to say, you know what, your point, Steve, we don't have time. We don't have time. Mm-hmm. And we know that, but it's easy to say it, and then we just kind of move along. I really do think that the momentum that developed almost petered out. And so when this change in how the master plan was going to operate, which is what this current governor is doing, there was no real understanding about what that meant. It meant that we were throwing away the decision-making process that got us where we have been able to get so far. It meant that we were ignoring the rules that we had set on ourselves to do it. But there wasn't the sort of outcry that I would love to have seen for people saying, wait a minute, this is how this works. We can't just ignore it now that somebody else wants to do something different. You got to go through the process. We just walked away from that for this year. We don't have to keep walking away from it again, right? Every single year we could get better again, but we have to do that.
And as you pointed out, this is ongoing. This is something
yes.
that future generations of Louisianans are going to be facing and dealing with. And as you pointed out at the beginning, Steve, when this all started, when you started working with folks concerned about restoring our coast, at first you thought, we could bring it all back. We could just bring the coast back to what it, what it was like before this started happening to us, and now compounded with climate change and then, sea level rise and subsidence. It's just a situation that is not going away, and we can't really bring it back. So to wrap up this great conversation, because this has been a lot of fun listening to you all, ideally, what would you say what's our goal? What are we working toward? What do we want our state, the bottom of our state, the Gulf Coast of our state, to look like ultimately?
Well, and I think the most important point is what Garret referred to earlier. When we started looking at all the projects and things that could or should be done, we were looking at 200 plus million. Now it'd probably be billion. It'd probably be 500 billion now. But the plan was set up and established to identify priorities, that you have projects that are going to be sustainable, long-term, and not only, it's not just restoration. We have the people who live along the coast. We have a working coast. We always talk about how important that is. So it's, of course, preserving the ecosystem, but protecting the communities and providing both sustainable communities that can live within this dynamic environment, but also projects that are sustainable. Yeah, we can't do the 500 billion, but the 50 billion and the plan that's established is intended and I'm optimistic too, that ultimately we can develop projects. We'll never get back what we had, but we can have a thriving economy, people who live along the coast, and provide the resources that are so critical to the nation, fisheries and oil and gas, and also have a sustainable ecosystem that can support that. The plan is there, we just need to implement it. And we can't get everything, but we can, and the plan is set up to ensure that we can establish that and sustain it long term if we just follow the plan.
Garret, what's your vision of what should we look like?
Look, everybody think back to right after Hurricane Katrina, where you were, where your head was. You would have done anything to prevent that from happening, to prevent our community from being destroyed, from preventing our neighbors from losing their lives. And now that we're 20 years out, just that memory fades, the urgency fades. And so, I want to remind you, want to remind everybody that look, Katrina was awful. It was a tragedy, but there's going to be another storm. Yep. And one of the things that we talked about a lot when we were all working together was getting ourselves in that mindset of when that next storm happens, what do you want to be able to say you did when your decisions were being reviewed under a microscope? Did you do the right thing? And I think that's what's so critical. And as Steve importantly pointed out before, look, the state is putting up some money, but let's be honest, they're not putting up much at all. How in the world are you going to have the credibility to go to the federal government and ask them for tens of billions of dollars if you're down here making political decisions, if you're reverting back to the pre-Katrina mindset and doing things that are political versus doing things that are science-based? And lastly, something that's really important and we brushed over a little bit. Look, I spent 5 years of my life negotiating with BP, and I wish I could have that time. I learned a lot of things that I never, ever cared to learn about oil spills and Oil Pollution Act and natural resources damage assessment process. I believe that those funds, and there were two different main pots. One was a civil and one was a criminal. The criminal funds, I believe that they are to achieve the objective of diversions in barrier islands. The projects they're talking about spending on right now aren't either one of those, and simply digging a hole in the ground where you've caused 350 acres of impacts from beginning to build a mid-Barataria sediment diversion, that doesn't advance a goal for a diversion or for a barrier island. So you haven't achieved the goals. The major part of the funds come from the natural resource damages. You are required to remediate for the environmental damages that happen. And this isn't just a Louisiana thing. This is the entire Gulf Coast, all 5 states and the federal agencies that are in charge of the oceans and those resources. If you're not remediating the impacts, you are subjected to both a federal law violation because you have to remediate for the impacts that occurred. But you're also subject to a consent decree in the federal court. So all these people that think, oh, we're just going to get politicians to get us out of this. No, there is a consent decree. You've got to go before the court. This isn't a federal agency thing or whatever else. And so I'm concerned that this could actually have a bigger impact than people realize. The integrity issue, yes, but also going back to the legislature and saying, hey, we need you to come up with $650 million, plus they spent another $300 million on these projects that don't achieve any of the goals. And so you got to give us $300 million more. Is that going to come out of other coastal projects? Mm-hmm. I mean, look, the reality is the way the agreement is written, those monies should effectively go back in the kitty to where Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, Florida, or a federal agency can come in and say, okay, well, if you're not doing that, we want to do this. Right. I don't think they're operating on sound legal advice right now, and I'm very concerned about the consequences, not just that we wasted $650, but that potentially the legislature is going to have to come back and replenish those funds from what? We don't have $650 million. And so it doesn't matter if you're from Lafourche, Terrebonne, Orleans, Jefferson, or from Caddo Parish. This impacts everybody in the legislature, and I think more scrutiny needs to be given to this decision.
What do we say to that? Yes. How do you follow? I'll let you follow up on that one.
I think that's right. I mean, again, this is all, we make our problems for ourselves. We can solve problems for ourselves. We have a process of being able to do it, but we have to deal with facts. We can't just say, I'm going to do this because I can. That never works out this way, and it's certainly not going to work out in this case where you've got laws that have to be followed, and you have a consent decree. The judge, you had to deal with the judge. He's a serious man, and he intended things to go a certain way. So there is very little doubt in my mind that if the current administration just continues to follow the path that they're on right now, that they're going to be challenged in court, and it's going to go back before the judge. I'm sure, as I'm sitting here, that that's going to happen. And so they don't get to duck it. It's not going to happen that way.
And so meanwhile, the clock is ticking, and we keep losing our coast, and it's not a problem that's gone away. It's something that we have to address, and we need the funds to address it. So, Steve, your closing thoughts.
And I would just say, with this whole discussion, we need to be thinking about there is not going to be someone that's going to ride to the rescue for Louisiana. There's not the feds. Nobody's going to do it. For us to solve this problem, we have to do it. We as Louisianians have to do it. And you have to take on, and that doesn't mean you're just taking one perspective. Whatever the differences are, we better darn well fix it, or we all lose. So I would just say, again, it's a time for action more than just kind of squabbling and arguing with one another. But we've got to, leaving it the way it is, not going to get us where we want to be.
Okay, we talked the truth here, and it is a problem. It definitely is, but hopefully we can fix it so that we can continue our way of life. Because Louisiana does love its way of life. And also we're important to the rest of the country. We mean something to the rest of the country. They need us, don't they?
Yeah. If Chesapeake doesn't have our crabs, what do they have? Right? I mean,
all right, guys, thank you so much. Great conversation. I know that people who listen to this will learn a lot from it. Thank you all very much. And also, I've got to tell you all, thank you so much for the work that you've done over these decades to save our coast, to address the challenges. And the challenges are huge and are going to continue to be big. So it's now going to be up to the future generations to also deal with them, and you've given them a good foundation. Thank you so much. Be sure to join us for our other episodes of Early Warnings to learn more about the people, the planning, and the projects that started the effort to protect and restore the Louisiana coast. Our next episode looks at what coastal restoration efforts have accomplished so far and what more needs to be done. Thanks for joining us. You can find all episodes of Early Warnings on WYES YouTube and other sites where you get your podcasts. Go to WYES.org for more information.
All of the views and opinions expressed by the participants in this program are solely their current opinion and do not reflect those of WYES or its affiliated associations.